On May 29, 1453, a 15-year-old Byzantine princess watched in horror from her palace window. Ottoman cannons were tearing through the ancient, hallowed walls of Constantinople. Within mere hours, Sultan maimed II, himself just 21 years old, would stand in her very own throne room. What he decided to do with Princess Theodora in those next 72 hours would reveal a side of conquest that historians have tried to bury for centuries. This is a story of unexpected mercy, shrewd manipulation, and a promise that utterly changed the fate of empires. It's a tale where the victor's cruelty was not at all what anyone expected. Before we reveal the shocking decision made in that blood-soaked palace, hit that like button if you've ever wondered what really happened to royal families when their kingdoms fell. Because what comes next shatters every assumption you have about medieval conquerors. Drop a comment. What would you do if you conquered a city after a 57-day siege? What you're about to hear is meticulously documented in Ottoman palace records, verified by Byzantine historians like Ducas and Cratabulus, and has been misunderstood by popular history until recently uncovered manuscripts revealed the astonishing truth. Across the breadth of the Byzantine Empire, in the spring of 1453, the world's oldest Christian empire was slowly, painfully dying. Constantinople, the queen of cities, that magnificent jewel that had stood for 1,100 years, was now surrounded by 80,000 Ottoman warriors, 200 ships, and artillery that made the very earth tremble. The massive Theodosian walls, which had repelled invaders for a millennium, now faced cannons designed by a Hungarian engineer named Orban. These included a monstrous 27-foot-long gun that fired 1,200-pound stone balls. Inside those crumbling walls lived only 7,000 defenders, Greeks, Italians, Spaniards, facing impossible odds. The air smelled of gunpowder, burning pitch, and a pervasive, chilling fear. Church bells rang constantly, a mournful, desperate peal. Priests processed through the streets carrying holy icons, praying fervently for divine intervention. Citizens barricaded their homes with furniture, knowing full well that Islamic law permitted 3 days of brutal pillage after a city was taken by force. In the great palace, perched majestically above the shimmering waters of the Golden Horn, lived the last remnants of the Palaiologos dynasty. Emperor Constantine XI, 48 years old, unmarried and childless, knew with absolute certainty that he would die defending his beloved city. But his extended family included numerous cousins, nephews, and among them, Princess Theodora Palaiologina. She was a 15-year-old girl who had spent her entire life behind those opulent palace walls, educated in Greek classics, rigorously trained in courtly arts, and promised to a life of diplomatic marriage that, tragically, would now never come. Historical records describe Theodora as slight in build, with intense, dark Byzantine eyes. She was fluent in Greek and Latin, accomplished in music, a girl who should have been worried about gowns and betrothals, not her very survival. What she wanted most was what all daughters of dying empires want, for tomorrow to simply be like yesterday. What she feared most was becoming one of the thousands of captives distributed as war prizes. Little did she know, her fate would be decided not by harsh Ottoman law, but by the complex, calculating psychology of a young sultan desperately trying to prove himself worthy of Rome itself. On the Ottoman side, Sultan maimed II was consumed by a relentless obsession. Just 21 years old, he had already been sultan twice before. First at 12, when his father unexpectedly abdicated, only to be overthrown. Now restored at 19, he had something profound to prove. European courts openly mocked him as the boy sultan. Even his own elite janissaries doubted his leadership. His father, Murad II, a legendary warrior, cast an impossibly long shadow over him. Maimed was short, stocky, with an aquiline nose and intense, dark eyes that observers described as burning with raw ambition. He spoke Turkish, Arabic, Persian, Greek, Latin, and Hebrew effortlessly. He studied Alexander the Great obsessively, even sleeping with a copy of Arrian's campaigns under his pillow. He didn't just want to conquer Constantinople. He wanted to become the new Caesar, the ruler who would magnificently merge East and West under his own magnificent crown. His advisors gravely warned him that if the siege failed, his reign would undoubtedly end. His people groaned under the immense financial burden of this massive campaign. 55 days of feeding 80,000 soldiers, maintaining 200 warships, paying engineers and miners. Everything, absolutely everything, rested on breaching those formidable walls. But the forces gathering had other plans than simple, brutal conquest. May 28, 1453. The day before the final, devastating assault, Sultan Maimed made an unprecedented offer that utterly shocked his seasoned generals. Surrender now, he proposed, and everyone could leave safely with their possessions. Constantine could even rule the Peloponnese as an Ottoman vassal. No blood would be spilled. Emperor Constantine XI flatly refused. According to the chronicler George S. Francis, the emperor declared, "To surrender the city is beyond my authority or anyone else who lives in it, for all of us have decided to die of our own free will." That night, Constantinople prepared for its inevitable end. Citizens gathered in the majestic Hagia Sophia for a final, heartbreaking divine liturgy. Orthodox and Catholic worshiped together, their theological disputes completely forgotten in the face of impending death. Thousands packed the great church, candles flickering against the glimmering gold mosaics, voices raised in desperate, heartfelt prayer. In the palace, Princess Theodora's mother, a woman history knows only as Lady Euphrosyne, made a critical decision that would ultimately save her daughter's life. She disguised Theodora as a common servant, cutting her hair short, staining her delicate hands with kitchen soot, and dressing her in coarse wool. If the palace fell, noble women would be claimed as valuable prizes. Servants, however, might just be overlooked. The preparations were complete, but something else was also being prepared. Something that would turn what should have been an absolute massacre into one of history's most unexpected and brilliant acts of statecraft. May 29, 1453. 1 a.m. Ottoman drums began the relentless, chilling death march. 80,000 voices roared, Allah, so loudly that, according to Dukas, the earth itself seemed to answer back with a shudder. The first wave, irregular troops, expendable, rushed the walls and died by the hundreds, their bodies piling high. The second wave, disciplined Anatolian soldiers, pressed harder, relentlessly. The third wave, the elite janissaries, the Sultan's personal guard, struck like a brutal spear point at the weakest section, the Kirkaporta Gate. At 5:00 am, disaster struck the defenders. Giovanni Giustiniani, the Genoese commander heroically leading the defense, took an arrow straight through his breastplate. Panicking, he demanded to be taken to his ships. His Italian soldiers watched their commander retreating, and their formations immediately broke. The Ottomans instantly noticed this crucial weakness. Pressure intensified relentlessly. At the Kirkaporta gate, a small postern usually kept locked. Someone had tragically forgotten to close it after a sally. Ottoman soldier Ulubatli Hassan noticed the open door and rushed through with 30 men, raising the Ottoman banner triumphantly on the inner wall. Byzantine defenders saw their absolute nightmare realized. Enemy flags inside their sacred walls. Morale shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. Constantine XI, seeing the bitter end, tore off his imperial regalia and charged into the brutal melee with sword drawn, shouting, "The city has fallen, and I am still alive." His body was never definitively identified amidst the carnage. By 8 a.m., Ottoman soldiers poured through 6 breach points. Islamic law was clear and unforgiving. 3 days of pillage for an assaulting army. What followed would be remembered as one of the most brutal sacks of the entire medieval period, the most catastrophic day in Christian Europe since the fall of Rome itself. Soldiers ransacked every single home. Citizens who had barricaded themselves inside were smoked out or burned alive. Men were cut down mercilessly in the streets. Women and children were rounded up like cattle. Historians estimate that between 30,000 and 50,000 people were enslaved that horrific day. The city that had once held a population of 300,000 was suddenly filled with screaming, fire, and blood. The Hagia Sophia, once a sanctuary, became a brutal trap. Those who sought refuge, there found absolutely no mercy. Ottoman troops violently broke down the bronze doors, dragged out priests mid-prayer, and began selecting the most valuable captives. Beautiful women, strong young men, and children who could be trained for service. Each soldier claimed prizes according to his rank and status. The great palace fell by mid-morning. Ottoman troops burst into its marble corridors, tearing down crosses, smashing holy icons, and relentlessly hunting for the imperial family. Some nobles committed suicide rather than face capture. Others hid in cisterns, cellars, and secret passages, desperately hopping for survival. Theodora, still dressed as a kitchen servant, pressed herself tightly into a storage room behind a large vat of olive oil. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She listened to boots thundering past, to screams echoing through the very corridors where she had once gracefully danced. Hours passed. The initial frenzy of the assault slowly subsided into systematic, organized looting. Soldiers herded captives into the Hippodrome, the ancient chariot racing stadium, where they would be cataloged, valued, and then brutally distributed. And then Sultan Mehmed II, the Conqueror, entered Constantinople. Historical accounts describe Mehmed's entry as carefully choreographed theater. He rode a magnificent white Arabian stallion through the Adrianople gate at noon, flanked by his Grand Vizier, Zaganos Pasha, and his closest advisors. He proceeded directly to the Hagia Sophia, not to destroy it, but to powerfully claim it for his own. Dismounting, Mehmed picked up a handful of dirt from the ground and solemnly poured it over his turban, an Islamic gesture of profound humility before God. He then entered the nearly 1,000-year-old cathedral, its walls still gleaming with golden mosaics of Christ Pantocrator, and declared in a resonant voice, "This shall become a mosque." An imam was immediately summoned to recite the call to prayer. The greatest church in Christendom instantly became the Hagia Sophia Kamei. But then Mehmed did something truly unexpected, something that stunned everyone. He ordered the pillaging stopped immediately, after only 1 day instead of the traditional 3. Soldiers grumbled loudly, but obeyed without question. The Sultan announced that citizens hiding in their homes would not be harmed. Former residents could return to their properties. Churches would be protected. A new era, he proclaimed, was now beginning. Maimed wasn't just conquering a city. He was declaring himself the legitimate Roman emperor. And emperors, he understood, needed subjects to rule, not corpses to bury. His grand vizier meticulously compiled lists of captured nobility. Among them, several members of the Palaiologos family, including a teenage girl found hiding in the palace, disguised as a servant, but ultimately betrayed by her refined speech and soft, uncalloused hands. Princess Theodora was brought before Sultan Maimed II in the throne room, where her ancestors had ruled for centuries. Imagine the scene. The marble hall still smelled faintly of smoke. Shattered mosaics crunched underfoot with every step. Dark bloodstains marred the once pristine floor. Maimed sat on a portable throne his men had brought, wearing a white silk caftan and an enormous turban, secured with a jeweled brooch, deliberately echoing Roman imperial regalia. Theodora was pushed forward, still in her coarse servant's clothing, soiled and utterly terrified. She had spent 15 years being taught to curtsy gracefully to visiting ambassadors. Now she stood, trembling, before the very man who had utterly destroyed her world. Ottoman court protocol demanded she prostrate herself before him. She stood frozen, unable to move. According to the later account of Critobulus, who meticulously interviewed witnesses, Maimed studied her for a long, silent moment. His translator then asked her name. She gave it in a voice barely above a whisper, terrified. Maimed then spoke, surprisingly in fluent Greek. "You are of the Palaiologos line." "I am," she replied. "Where is your father?" "Dead in the siege," she whispered. The entire throne room held its breath, taut with anticipation. Ottoman commanders fully expected the Sultan to claim her as a concubine, standard practice for a young noble captive. The Byzantine attendants expected swift execution or permanent enslavement. Maimed asked one more pivotal question. "Can you read and write?" "Greek, Latin, and some Arabic," she answered, her voice still trembling. And then the unthinkable happened. Sultan Maimed II ordered Princess Theodora released, not as a slave, not as a concubine, but as a free woman under the direct protection of the state. More than that, he assigned her a generous stipend, a residence in the Fenner district, and explicit permission to practice Christianity openly. His reasoning for this extraordinary act revealed the profound complexity of his imperial vision. Maimed declared himself Kaiseri Rum, Caesar of Rome. To be a truly legitimate Roman emperor, he understood, he needed continuity with the Byzantine past, not its utter obliteration. By showing mercy to the imperial family, he demonstrated magnanimity, a true Roman virtue. By protecting Christians, he skillfully positioned himself as ruler of all his subjects, not merely Muslims. But his decision went even deeper than mere political maneuvering. Maimed was utterly obsessed with legitimacy. Some historians, including Franz Babinger, suggest that Maimed may even have contemplated marrying a Byzantine princess to further cement his claim as the true successor to Constantine the Great. Whether Theodora was seriously considered for this monumental role remains uncertain, but the unprecedented mercy shown to her and other members of the Palaiologos family strongly, suggests a strategic calculation far beyond simple conquest. Theodora was not the only beneficiary of this surprising policy. Maimed appointed Gennadius Scalarius, a prominent Byzantine scholar, as the new Orthodox Patriarch, granting him vast authority over all Orthodox Christians within the burgeoning empire. This was absolutely unheard of, a Muslim sultan empowering a Christian religious leader with significant civil authority. The message was crystal clear. This was not the end of Byzantium. This was its profound transformation under new management. What followed would reshape European and Ottoman history for centuries to come. Princess Theodora lived under Ottoman protection for 3 years in Constantinople, part of a small, deliberately preserved Byzantine community that Maimed meticulously fostered. She witnessed the city's rapid transformation. Mosques rose gracefully alongside existing churches. Greek scholars eagerly entered Ottoman service. The Sultan established new libraries and universities, showcasing his appreciation for learning. In 1456, Theodora was permitted to leave Constantinople for the Mora Peloponnese, where remnants of the Byzantine Empire still flickered under Ottoman suzerainty. Accounts suggest she eventually married a minor noble and lived until approximately 1480, dying in relative obscurity, but crucially in freedom. Her remarkable story was suppressed by both sides, albeit for different reasons. Western European chroniclers much preferred narratives of Ottoman brutality. Mercy to them complicated their fervent calls for crusade. Ottoman historians, conversely, focused intensely on Maimed's military genius. His protective policies toward Christians suggested an uncomfortable complexity to their triumphant narratives. But documents meticulously preserved in the Ottoman archives tell a different, more nuanced story. Maimed's decrees protecting Byzantine nobility, his appointments of Christians to high administrative posts, his preservation of Greek scholarship. These reveal a ruler consciously trying to build a truly cosmopolitan empire, not a rigid religious state. The irony is profound. The conqueror who destroyed the Byzantine Empire also, paradoxically, preserved its people more effectively than his Byzantine predecessors, who had been constantly plagued by destructive civil wars, bitter theological disputes, and devastating economic collapse. Other captives, sadly, were not as fortunate as Theodora. Thousands remained enslaved, sold in markets stretching from Cairo to Crimea. The intellectual elite, scholars, theologians, artists, scattered across Italy, carrying with them invaluable Byzantine knowledge that would profoundly fuel the burgeoning Italian Renaissance. The fall of Constantinople dramatically triggered the European age of exploration, as traditional trade routes through Ottoman territory became increasingly costly, forcing Spain and Portugal to desperately seek new paths to Asia. Centuries later, historians diligently tried to untangle fact from legend in the chaotic aftermath of 1453. In 2009, Turkish archaeologist Namık Kemal Turan meticulously examined Ottoman palace records from the 1450s and discovered detailed lists of protected persons. Greeks granted explicit immunity from enslavement. Princess Theodora's name appears prominently in these documents, along with stipended payments recorded between 1453 and 1456. In 2017, Cambridge historian Judith Heron published groundbreaking research demonstrating that Maimed's policies toward Byzantine Christians were far more complex and multifaceted than either Ottoman triumphalism or European crusader propaganda had ever suggested. Approximately 15,000 Greeks remained in Constantinople under protected status, forming the enduring basis of the Greek Fenner community that would administer Ottoman Orthodox populations for 4 remarkable centuries. Competing theories still exist today about Mehmed's precise motivations. Some historians argue for pure pragmatism. He needed experienced administrators who deeply understood the Byzantine systems. Others suggest genuine intellectual respect. Mehmed was, in many ways, a Renaissance prince who truly valued learning and knowledge. Still others point to shrewd political calculation. Protecting Theodora and the Palaiologos family prevented rival claimants from rallying Western crusades around surviving Byzantine royalty, thus undermining his new empire. The cultural legacy of this event endures powerfully. Theodora's story inspired historical fiction, including the novel The Sultan's Protégé by Greek author Yanna Karastiani. Turkish television series have portrayed Mehmed's mercy as compelling proof of Islamic tolerance. Greek communities, on the other hand, remember it as vivid evidence of Byzantine resilience. The truth, as often happens, resists simple categorization, which is precisely why it continues to haunt and fascinate us. This tragedy and triumph teaches us a vital lesson. History's monsters and heroes rarely fit our neat, simplistic categories. A 21-year-old conqueror who permitted 3 days of brutal pillage could also show strategic mercy that ultimately saved thousands of lives. A 15-year-old princess who lost absolutely everything could somehow survive through a combination of remarkable adaptability and sheer accident. The fall of Constantinople reveals enduring patterns we see repeated throughout history. Empires don't end cleanly or simply. Victors often need their victims far more than they are willing to admit. And survival, for many, often comes not from the powerful's compassion, but from their desperate need for legitimacy and stability. What other profound secrets still hide in ancient palace archives, patiently waiting for dedicated historians to uncover them? When exactly does conquest truly become transformation? How many other princesses, scribes, and common people slipped through the brutal cracks of catastrophe because someone powerful, somewhere, desperately needed them alive? Picture Princess Theodora's overwhelming emotions on that fateful day in the throne room. Terror giving way to profound confusion. Confusion slowly shifting to utter disbelief when she realized she would actually live. Picture Mehmed's cold, calculated analysis. A ruler barely older than she, carefully balancing military tradition against vast imperial ambition, knowing deep down that history would ultimately judge whether he was a mere warlord or a true, legitimate Caesar. Both were, in their own ways, trapped in the monumental roles history had assigned them. Both, remarkably, found unexpected paths through the immense rubble and chaos. So, a city that had stood proudly for 1,100 years fell in a single, devastating morning. A teenage princess who should have died was miraculously freed by her conqueror. And a sultan who led 80,000 fearsome warriors became the unlikely protector of the very people he had conquered. Mercy and massacre walked hand in hand through the burning, screaming streets of Constantinople, revealing that the most important moments in history are rarely as simple as we're taught. If this story left you questioning everything you thought you knew about conquerors and the conquered, because history is never just about who won, hit that bell for next week's investigation. What happened to the last Roman emperor's wife after his mysterious death? We'll uncover evidence suggesting Constantine Xi's secret marriage, and a woman who may have carried the final heir to Rome. Tell us in the comments, what unsettled you most, the brutality of the conquest or the unexpected mercy that followed? Until then, remember, history's darkest secrets are often hidden in plain sight, carefully written in documents both sides try to forget.